This video was sponsored by Surfshark VPN. In 2019, Parasite showed us what can happen when growing class tensions are ignored. The movie's commentary shed a light on the disconnect between those living a life of luxury and those who directly, or in most cases indirectly, provide them with it. The film's message seemingly resonated with audiences around the world, but as we sit here in 2023, watching the already insurmountable gap between the haves and the have-nots grow wider by the day, you can't help but wonder if the movie's warning has fallen on deaf ears. Working and lower class people struggle worse every year, while the billionaire elite class grows more and more indifferent to their struggle, and their own hand in it. Meanwhile, the masses fail to hold those above them accountable. Instead, we place them on a pedestal, letting them dictate our culture as the media sucks up to them. But the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't even exist. And Parasite explores what happens when a working class family slowly realizes that the devil does exist and he sits in a beautiful house, basking in the sunshine while they suffocate underground. The film follows the Kim family, who are doing their best to survive in a semi-basement apartment in Seoul, searching for free Wi-Fi from surrounding businesses, folding pizza boxes for less than minimum wage, and inhaling toxic fumes in an effort to exterminate stink bugs from their home. But opportunity arises when the son Ki-woo gets a visit from his friend Min-yuk. Min-yuk gives Ki-woo with a scholar stone from his grandfather, mythologized to bring material wealth to its beholder. During their catching up, Min-hyuk also informs Ki-woo of a job opportunity, as he tells Ki-woo that he would like for Ki-woo to take over from him as the tutor to the daughter of a rich family who pays well. Ki-woo then tells Min that he can't do the job because he doesn't attend university. Min tells Ki-woo that it doesn't matter because the matriarch of the household is extremely trusting, and then reminds Ki-woo that he's plenty qualified because he's taken, albeit failed, the university entrance exam 4 times. So Ki-woo agrees and decides to recruit his sister Ki-young to use her Photoshop and design skills to forge university documents. Ki-woo, wearing his best clothes and with forged certifications in hand, visits the household of the Park family, and is ultimately hired as their daughter's tutor. While there, he learns the family is also looking for an art teacher for their son, Da Wong. So Ki-woo gets an idea and uses this as an opportunity to get his sister a job. He lies to the Parks and tells them his sister King-young is actually a classmate of his named Jessica, who is a qualified art therapist and in high demand. The lie works, and the Park family decides to hire Ki-young under these false pretenses. Eventually, Ki-woo and Ki-young devise plans to get the Park family's chauffeur and also their housekeeper fired so that they can get their parents, Ki-taek and Chun-suk, hired by the Parks under false identities as well. This all goes according to plan, and the King family is now bringing in 4 separate paychecks from the Parks, and things are finally looking up for the Kims. For the first time, upward mobility is within their grasp until it slips through their fingers in a spectacular and violent fashion later in the movie. But before we get too much into the movie here, we need to ask ourselves an important question. Why is this upward mobility so difficult for these people? And also, why is it so hard to find Parasite on streaming services? You see, when trying to make this video, I kept getting messages from streaming platforms like Prime that it wasn't available to watch my location. So I was stuck until I used Surfshark, the sponsor of today's video. By using Surfshark, I could change my virtual location to Japan and finally watch the movie. And that's why I want to tell you about our video sponsor, Surfshark. You see, Surfshark VPN keeps your online identity safe by encrypting all of the information sent between your device and the internet, keeping your personal data protected from big companies and cybercriminals, while also swapping the real location of your device with a new one. This way you can virtually travel to any country across the globe, because masking your IP address is essential to becoming private online. A VPN makes sure that your city, country and download history aren't linked to your identity, and with Surfshark's Clean Web feature, they allow you to block ads, trackers, malware and phishing attempts, so you can surf the web safely. For me personally, I like to work from cafes, but the problem is I have to use shared public Wi-Fi, which can be dangerous, as it's a goldmine for hackers. But with Surfshark VPN, I can encrypt all of my online data and secure my personal information when using the free public Wi-Fi. On top of this, Surfshark does not monitor, track or store what you do online. That means there's no connection or activity logs. So make sure to check out Surfshark today, and if you enter my promo code MOONREAL, you'll get an extra 3 months free at surfshark.deal/moonreal. On their Parasite, the Kim family's only real chance at achieving a comfortable life is to deceive the rich into allowing them to get closer. In almost every version of society, the rich and powerful tend to maintain a wall between themselves and the poor, in some cases even literally. From the beginning, the film illustrates these boundaries, the most obvious of which is the dichotomy between the homes of the rich versus the homes of the poor, and it's the same when we're introduced. We see that the Kims live underground amongst the insects, with little natural light available to nourish them, but when we see where the Parks live, it's high above everything else. It's not only an on-the-nose depiction of their social social status, but it also maximizes the literal physical distance between the Park household and the Kim household. This, just like in the real world, allows for minimum interaction between people like the Parks and people like the Kims. And throughout the film, this idea of poor people living underground is constantly reinforced. By hiding a city's poverty underground, the elite are able to carry on like poverty doesn't exist and enjoy their luxuries without guilt or self-reflection. Our cities and social practices are constructed to maintain this boundary on behalf of those who can afford to be shielded by it. Luxury high-rises with security, exclusive clubs and services with unrealistic financial barriers to entry, hostile architecture built to antagonize the homeless, all acting as a physical manifestation of the divide between a ruling class and the poverty they create by exploiting those below them. The rich have drawn a line that the poor are not allowed to cross. And so what happens when a poor person oversteps this arbitrary line? Well, the film explores this. In fact, Mr. Park makes several explicit mentions of this line throughout the movie.
그럼 회사에 손을 딱 전시켜. 내가 원래 손을 넘는 사람을 제일 싫어하는데.
The only poor people the Parks interact with are their employees, and Mr. Park makes it clear that if someone is perceived to have crossed the line, they will get fired and replaced. The line maintains the hierarchy between the masters and the subordinates, and throughout the movie, there are several instances of subordinates, the Kims, crossing the line under the nose of their masters, the Parks. Meanwhile, the Parks disrespect the line as they please, and even in some cases get a thrill out of it, because this line isn't meant to keep the powerful in check, it's meant to maintain the hierarchy and keep the working class powerless. But there are moments where the relationships between members of the Park family and members of the Kim family are flipped on their head. More specifically, the interactions between Ki Young and the Parks. Ki Young is able to set boundaries of her own when tutoring the family's son, and she does so confidently enough where the Parks obey her wishes. And we can see it makes the Parks uncomfortable when she does this, but they don't fire her. In these moments, she has power over them, and later in the film, we get a glimpse as to why she's able to have such power. In a moment of drunken transparency, Ki-woo explains that Ki Young carries herself in a way that makes her blend in with the rich and powerful. Her confident and open disrespect of the line, while drawing one of her own, signals to the Parks that she is indeed elite and on their socioeconomic level, which drives home the fact that this line, both in the movie and in society, is completely arbitrary. The line doesn't really exist, it's a myth meant to keep the poor in a subordinate position in our society and protect the sanctity of our faux utopian bubble constructed by the rich. But when the poor start viewing the rich as social equals, they lose their power. So why don't the working class ever do this? Why do we fall in line? Why do we respect the boundaries of the elite while our own boundaries are constantly being infringed upon? It's because when you're born into this Western postmodern society, the hierarchy is ingrained in you from birth, conditioned to respect those who have immense wealth regardless of how they've acquired it or how they treat their fellow man. Wealth is inherently conflated with greatness, but why exactly? Because for the elites in our society to continue amassing wealth, the working class must have incentive to continue working for them. In our late stage of crony capitalism, any tangible and attainable incentives for the working class become scarce. The reality is that in such a system, the vast majority of the working class will struggle to achieve their financial dreams or even the most basic level of comfortability. So what keeps them from giving up and downing tools completely? And what keeps us stuck in the position we find ourselves in? Simple answer is that for most of us, we don't have safety nets. Even if we did have safety nets, nothing would change, because we're sold on a false idea of meritocracy. You see, in our minds, we're all just a few good investments away and some hard work away from being an elite ourselves. So by that logic, it can be assumed that anyone who's elite must have gotten there from grit, determination, and smart choices. However, in reality, the majority of multi-billionaires and banking elites is that they got there from their inheritance, a handful of luck, and mass exploitation, or some combination of three. Despite this reality, we tend to respect those in these positions according to the illusion of meritocracy they've upheld, and so we just continue to compete amongst ourselves for the chance of one day being in their top position. We can see this phenomena of cultural homogeny on full display when we see how Kai Taek expresses his unwavering admiration of Mr. Park, despite barely knowing his personality or the story behind his wealth. Same with Gwen Sai, when we're introduced to him later in the film. Both men have every reason to resent someone like Mr. Park. Mr. Park is amassing his wealth off the backs of people like him, as they live in putrid squalor. Instead, they look up to Mr. Park as a god amongst men. They salute him as he steps out of his luxury car and steps into his beautiful sunny home, whilst they live in damp rooms underground devoid of light, feeding on his table scraps. There's no resentment, only respect and a yearning for his approval. Meanwhile, Mr. Parks can't even stand to be in the same vicinity as Kai Taek or Gwen Sai, so throughout the movie, he's constantly offended by the smell of Kai Taek, despite remaining ignorant to his own hand and contributing to a society that forces millions of people like Kai Taek to live in a basement. And for Kai Taek, the smell acts as an unshakable barrier to earning the acceptance of the ruling class he aspires to be a part of. It tells us that unbeknownst to him, his class is an unshakable part of him that the wealthy can detect from a mile away. Because of this, Kai Taek and his family will always be seen as outsiders and never achieve the upward mobility that would allow them to thrive rather than survive, and as ultimately the continual continuous emphasis on a smell by the Parks that eventually pushes Kai-taek to his breaking point. Because in the latter half of the movie, the Kims quickly discover their chance of upward mobility might be about to go up in smoke with one ring of a doorbell. While the Parks are out of town for a camping trip, and the Kims are taking full advantage of the house, the Parks' former housekeeper Moon Gwang appears on their doorstep. With little choice but to let her enter, Chun-suk finds out that Moon Gwang has been hiding her husband Gwen-se in a secret bunker under the Parks' house for the past 4 years in an effort to avoid violent debt collectors. Moon Gwang begs Chun-suk to let them stay, even offering to pay, but Chun-suk threatens to call the police, and just as she does this, Moon Gwang discovers the rest of the Kim family, and because she recognizes them as the remaining Park staff, she realizes the scam the Kims are pulling and immediately blackmails them with a recording on her phone. And as the two families battle to preserve their subordinate roles under the Park family, and in turn their means of survival, they're all interrupted by an unexpected call to the house phone. The call is from the Parks, who reveal they're returning home early due to the storm and will be there in just minutes. In this moment, the Kims are able to overpower Moon Gwang and Gang-se, tying them up in a secret bunker right under the Parks' noses. And so after a night of hiding and morale-sinking eavesdrops, the Kims finally escape the Parks' house and go back to their home only to discover complete devastation. Their basement apartment is irreparably flooded, and while spending the night in a packed shelter, they're called upon by the Parks to help them prepare for their son's birthday party the following day. So despite feeling at their lowest, the Kims must try to put on their happy faces once again to serve the Parks. The Parks remain ignorant of and indifferent to the problems the Kims face, and in light of overhearing a private conversation between Mr. and Mrs. Park from the night before,
야, 어디서 그 냄새가 나는데?
뭔 냄새?
김 기사님 스멜.
김 기사?
the Kims start noticing all the ways in which they're inadvertently brushed aside and looked down upon. Kai-taek in particular becomes fixated on how the Parks react to his smell. So once the party finally starts, Gang-se escapes from the bunker and attacks the Kims in front of everyone, knocking out Ki-woo and killing Ki-young. Chun-suk is able to kill Gang-se, while Kai-taek tries to save their daughter from bleeding out. Meanwhile, Mr. Park shows little concern for the well-being of his employees, but instead, once again, recoils at the smell of them, which is the final straw for Kai-taek, who finally revolts and murders Mr. Park in front of an entire yard full of elites. In the aftermath, he immediately flees the scene, never to be seen again. The ending is representative of yet another way in which the working class are brainwashed by the elite they serve. Instead of going after the Parks, or even one of the other countless wealthy elites at the party who are directly responsible for creating a system where his family is hopeless to live a comfortable life, Gang-se instead targets the Kims. Because in modern societies, the working class are led to believe they are limited resources to go around, that the money trickling down from those at the top is only enough to feed so many. So instead of banding together in times of hardship and changing the status quo where the elites hoard resources to create artificial scarcity, the masses are inclined to directly compete with one another for the scraps, thus eating each other while their oppressors sit comfortably at a distance. And the back half of Parasite tells this tale. The Kims refuse to cooperate with Moon Gwang and Gwan-se. Despite being offered the prospect of a mutually beneficial arrangement, they don't see the strength of partnership and instead protect the Parks' food and shelter as if it was their own, fearing that if they share, it might all come crumbling down. However, the film makes it obvious that the Parks have plenty of resources to go around, and this is further evidenced by the fact that Moon Gwang and Gang-se have already been pulling off this arrangement for several years. The Parks have so much available to them, they don't even notice when something goes missing. Yet the Kims still feel the need to gatekeep, afraid that if someone else is invited in, they might lose their seat at the table, and it's hard to blame them. The Kims are a family without a safety net. Their lives have been defined by the floor falling out from underneath them. They've all recently lost their jobs and are clinging onto the Parks for survival, and it can be difficult to find room in your heart to take care of others when you can barely take care of yourself. The truth is that most people who attempt to climb the ladder of a forced meritocracy simply can't afford to stop and pull someone else up with them, because if they slip and fall from the extra weight, there's nothing to catch them. Plans so easily fall apart for the poor, they must prioritize looking out for themselves over all else, and the resulting lack of community serves the ruling class. This emphasis on the fragility of plans is evident in Parasite, and perhaps the most cutting and direct commentary comes just before the climax of the movie, when Kai-taek is lying next to Ki-woo in the shelter after they lost their home. For someone like Kai-taek, who's been stuck in poverty his entire life, whose plans to climb out have repeatedly fallen apart, leaving him to pick up the pieces, it's far easier to resign than go through the cycle of fruitless effort over and over. It's a bleak outlook, but it's the reality for so many of us, The truth is that almost everyone can never really think past their next paycheck, and any risk taken to get out of this position can be catastrophic, which is why true upward mobility in society is so rare. And it's this line of thinking that we must keep in mind when we go to Parasite's ending. 1 month after the events of the birthday party, Ki-woo wakes up to find that he's been in a coma, as he and his mother plead guilty to criminal charges and mourn the loss of his sister Ki-young. They wonder where his father K-taek must be, and we learn that he was never found after killing Mr. Park and fleeing the scene. Eventually Ki-woo, drawn back to the new former house at the Parks, discovers his father is hiding out in the still undiscovered secret bunker under the house. And as the search for Ki-taek shows no signs of stopping, we can assume he'll be locked away there until the day he dies, in a prison of his own choosing, eating scraps from the fridge of the new wealthy family that has taken the place of the Parks. But we get a glimmer of hope when Ki-woo pledges to achieve the impossible, earning enough money to buy the house and finally grant his father freedom. However, we quickly find out that this hasn't actually materialized yet, and is nothing more than a plan. An optimistic viewer might suggest Ki-woo's determination and love for his family will give him the willpower and ability to see his plan come to fruition, but nearly everything the film has told us so far about plans suggests that it won't. The reality is that Ki-woo's dream will go unfulfilled, just like the dreams of so many others in his position. And if there was any doubt, the director of Parasite actually confirmed this. He says the final scene is intended to destroy all hopes that the audience had for better conditions for the Kim family, and as the credits roll, we hear Ki-woo's voice singing a song. He sings about how long and tirelessly he must work, and according to the director, this song was originally titled 564 years, which is a realistic estimation of how much time it would take Ki-woo to earn the money to buy the Park's house, making it an impossible dream for Ki-woo or even his grandchildren to achieve. The truth is that Ki-woo will probably be exploited for his labor by the wealthy until the day he dies. So this begs the question, who are the real parasites? In the film, the Kims are parasites in the most obvious sense. They live underground and they wiggle their way into the lives of the Parks, leeching off of their wealth for survival and taking livelihood from the existing staff for themselves. And at face value, the Parks seem like victims. They're generally kind to the Kims and do nothing explicit in the movie to deserve their fate. However, when we look a layer deeper, you could say the Parks were parasites in their own right. The Parks experience none of the hardship that besets lower class families, and they pay no attention to the plight of the Kims, or the staff before them, yet the Parks rely completely on the labour of these people to maintain and enjoy a lifestyle of luxury. We discover that every single one of the staff lives in squalor, not being paid enough by the Parks to actually afford decent living conditions. And when those living conditions result in their staff having an unpleasant smell, the Parks literally turn their noses up, unable to cope with the physical manifestation of their own exploitation. So which parasite is worse? The starved ones, who seek the bare minimum of nutrients from an overnourished host so it can survive, or the gluttonous ones, who drain an already limping host to the brink of death so it never has to feel uncomfortable? And remember to check out Surfshark VPN today by using the link in the description below.